For a long time, the question remained why exactly Luffy would go to Mary Joa and fight the world government there. Even though he's far from being a friend of the celestial dragons and would likely attack them if given the chance, considering how they usually behave, it's an entirely different matter to travel to the heart of the world government. This isn't because Luffy is afraid, but because he assumes there's simply nothing there for him. The prevailing theory about why Luffy will ultimately go to Mary Joa was that the One Piece would give him a reason, or that certain circumstances would involve him as an active participant in the final war, leaving him no choice but to fight directly against Imu in Mary Joa if he wants to win. However, the question has always been how exactly he would get involved, which is a topic in itself. Based on the current situation, we can say that various reasons are on the table that could lead Luffy to head to Mary Joa soon, and this video will cover those reasons as well as the question of when it might happen. First, we can say that Luffy and Imu will very likely meet soon, and in a situation where conflict is unavoidable. This means that afterward, Luffy will know about Imu, at least to some extent, and Imu, in turn, will gain first-hand experience against Luffy. This could serve as a foundation for a later conflict between the two, making it clear to both, especially Luffy, that Imu is a truly dangerous opponent on the horizon, one who cannot simply be ignored. While I believe that knowledge about Imu and their abilities wouldn't be enough to prompt Luffy to go to Mary Joa, let alone drop everything else, it does a good job of highlighting the danger, and perhaps even emphasizing that a fight in the future is inevitable. It also makes it clear that Luffy should act if Imu goes after his people, even indirectly. This brings us to the real reasons that could motivate Luffy to attack Mary Joa and Imu, and these reasons are not even that indirect. On the contrary, the most recent reason lies in the transformation of the giant pirates, especially Dory and Brogy, but others as well, who are friends of the Straw Hats. The Straw Hats fight for their friends, and the fact that the giant pirates are controlled by Imu and turned into loyal subjects is something Luffy is unlikely to simply accept. We now know that Imu wanted them to strengthen their own army. The question arises of how a fight against Imu on Elbaf might turn out. I consider it extremely unlikely that Imu would lose a direct fight against Luffy. Not yet. Not only because major antagonists typically win such battles, but also because we're talking about Imu, the antagonist in One Piece. Blackbeard is a candidate for the final antagonist, but he clearly shares this role with Imu, and there are solid arguments for why Imu should be the one instead of Blackbeard. However, that's not the discussion here. The point is simply that Imu is immensely important to the story, and thus, Oda is unlikely to let them lose directly. At the same time, I doubt Imu will be completely successful on Elbaf. So, what's a possible middle ground? The Straw Hats could find a way to send Imu back to Mary Joa, or perhaps it's not even them who figure it out, but someone like Scopa-Gaban. Or Imu follows a timer that runs out, something happens that forces Imu to return. But what then? What if Imu returns to Mary Joa? Would that automatically free the giant pirates? Maybe, but I don't really see why it would. So, what if Imu takes them along? Imu would essentially be taking Luffy's friends as hostages, even if that's not necessarily the task Imu has currently assigned them. To free them, Luffy would have to travel to Mary Joa and defeat Imu, or at least find a way to break the control, which would likely require coming into contact with the giant pirates who, in all likelihood, would be in Mary Joa by then. That's one possible reason for Luffy to go to Mary Joa, but not the only one. Currently, something is happening in Mary Joa. According to Imu's words, and what we've learned through Saint Saturn and Shamrock, it sounds like Mary Joa is under attack. In that case, it's very likely that the Revolutionary Army is behind it, or at least part of the attack. If the Revolutionary Army loses, for example, someone like Sabo could fall into Imu's hands. Honestly, I think that's unlikely, but it's possible. And if Sabo were captured by Imu, that would be a strong motivation to lure Luffy to Mary Joa. But aside from Sabo, there's another character who means a lot to the Straw Hats, and is being directly hunted by Imu, Vivi. We don't know exactly why, but I have a suspicion. We know that Lily disappeared 800 years ago, and Imu for some reason has a certain obsession with her. Now, Imu is capable of using Gonko as a temporary vessel. Who's to say that Imu's main body isn't also some kind of vessel, in the sense that Imu is no longer in their original body, but in Lily's body, and that Imu is interested in Vivi's body, because the similarity between Vivi and Lily is so striking, which could give Imu the advantage of being able to take over her body seamlessly if something happens to their current one. Until then, Imu could simply keep Vivi in their cold storage, where the giant Straw Hat is kept. For that, Imu would first need to get their hands on Vivi, but even the threat alone could be enough to make it clear to the Straw Hats that Vivi would have to watch her back and live in fear as long as Imu exists, because Imu won't stop hunting her. If the Straw Hats learn about this, they'd have another strong reason to go to Mary Joa to fight Imu. This could also tie in perfectly with the giant pirates. The question, of course, is how they would find out that Imu wants Vivi's body. There are a few possibilities. For example, the Straw Hats could meet Vivi, say, after Elbaf, talk to her, and recognize a pattern. Imu can take over bodies and wants Vivi for some reason. Alternatively, Warpol might have noticed that Imu and Vivi look strikingly similar if Imu is indeed using Lily's body. If Warpol realized this, he could have told Vivi. All these things combined would paint a rather grim fate for Vivi, one that the Straw Hats and Vivi could recognize. However, it could even be written in a way that Vivi appears on Elbaf, perhaps if she learns through Big News Morgans that the Straw Hats are there, and Morgans wants to get rid of her. It would make sense if they agreed that Morgans would bring her to the Straw Hats. That would create a very interesting situation, especially since Imu is currently on Elbaf. In that case, Imu could outright tell Vivi that they're after her body. The point is, there are various ways it could be made clear to the Straw Hats that they need to confront Imu to protect Vivi and retrieve the giant pirates. Then of course the question arises, if they go to Mary Joa, when would they use the current attack on Mary Joa and the events on Elbaf to transition directly into the final battle? It's possible, especially since Emu taking the giant pirates to Mary Joa would create a situation similar to Water 7 and Eni's lobby, interestingly, also connected to the world government. I'd say it's not quite as extreme, but it's heading in a very similar direction. Alternatively, Oda could write it so that the Straw Hats aren't ready yet. They might realize this themselves, or someone like Gaban could make it clear to them. Alternatively, they could obtain the 4th Road Poneglyph and, with Gaban's information that the One Piece could greatly help in the fight against the world government, they might decide to search for the One Piece first. Or perhaps Blackbeard tries to use Caribou's knowledge to seize one of the ancient weapons, say, Pluton on Wano. He attacks Wano, and then what? Do the Straw Hats first help the giants or their friends on Wano? Since Wano is closer and the problem is likely more urgent, I think the decision would fall on Wano. Afterward, they could get entangled in other matters that ultimately lead them to the One Piece before heading to Mary Joa. But what do you think? Let me know in the comments. If you have any questions, feel free to write them in the comments as well. For now, check out another video of mine that I highly recommend. With that said, goodbye and see you next time.